Hello, and it is good to see everyone for some intellectual gaming discussion intended exclusively for intellectual gamers. Nobody else is allowed to join. It's the rules. I set them. You have to follow them. But I know all my subscribers have all some level of intelligence, so you're all welcome here. How's it going, everybody? Thank you for stopping by. The reality is I didn't have time to get out a video today or even record, even though there's plenty of topics that I have in the back of my head that aren't fully fleshed out as to the direction that I necessarily want to go in. I did not have time to sit down and record, let alone edit a video, so I decided, hey, I want to do something. Wednesday is like the day. If you notice, if you follow the channel and what we do here, Wednesday is typically the day that I always try to get something out in some form or another, at the very latest Wednesday, and I was not even sure I'd be able to have something ready for Wednesday. So I said, you know what, let's just sit down. We'll sit down, we'll talk podcast style, get into some of the latest, some of the greatest, and we could actually swap over here to our gameplay scene. And in the background, you'll notice that we just have some Sky Oblivion gameplay going on. That's just to give you guys something to look at, something to appreciate and enjoy. And welcome, Assassin. You are intellectual. In fact, you know, you have a better memory than me in a lot of cases, so you often remember a lot of things that I just completely forget. And actually, I'm realizing now that I did not turn that on. In my haste, I have neglected to properly set up my space. So, give me 1 second here. Now I always forget where it is. There we go. And in about 3, 2 3/4, 1 0. Bam. Nice. All right. In my haste, I haven't set up my space. Yes, Dr. Seuss. You know how it goes. So anyway, I do have some topics in mind that I do want to address. Enjoy the Sky Oblivion in the background so you guys have something visually speaking. Thank you for stopping by, Zach. Hey, how are you doing? I hope you're doing good, because we haven't talked in quite a while. And Sips, it's going well. Thank you as well. So I do have a couple topics that I did want to talk about in particular. And of course, all the conversation is guided by what you guys have to say as well. So feel free to kind of throw, at any point, some discussion topics into the chat. Already feeling my gaming brain grow. Just the beginning, because if you look at the description, there's a couple topics that I do want to dive into. One, just kind of channel status and what's going on. I know that I've addressed this somewhat recently, but I do want to get into it more for me than for you guys, honestly, because it's to keep me on track and to kind of hype myself up. But additionally, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the state of Starfield, what I'm seeing, because if anybody's watched some of my recent videos, it has been a little disheartening to see so many people who are just completely opposed and do not like anything that Starfield is doing, and that's a shame. That's a shame to see. Not because I am overwhelmingly in love with Starfield, as though it's my favorite Bethesda game of all time, but because a lot of us were hoping that this would sort of be the game that shows Elder Scrolls 6, Fallout 5, and all these future projects are going to be set up for the best possible level of success. And then, of course, most recently, we have seen Pete Hines and Will Shen leaving Bethesda. Now, Pete Hines leaving Bethesda, he's been there for a very long time. 24 years, I want to say, although that number I'm just pulling from my head and I might be completely wrong. Might be longer than that, but he's been there a very, very long time. So an early retirement, congratulations to him. But someone like Will Shen is an interesting case, and we could dive into that a little bit. But additionally, there's the other important factor that I sort of wanted to dive into about why Starfield is getting as much love and is getting as much hate as it's getting from all these different perspectives, because I do think that the folks who are upset with Bethesda or upset with Starfield, obviously not all of them, you're always going to have bad eggs in there, but a lot of them do have a pretty substantial point in some of the arguments you make, and I want to be conscientious of that without just saying, hey, Starfield is good, all of you shut up, you're wrong, and your opinion's not valid, and go take it somewhere else and just go play other games if you don't like Starfield. Because even though that's an easy mentality to fall into, and it's one that I often try to be conscious of avoiding, because I don't think it's a very good place to be as far as making sure that games actually do progress and the studios can grow and continue to improve, to just say, well, if you don't like the game, go play something else. Bad mentality. But also, I wanted to talk a little bit about what defines, in talking about what's good and bad about Starfield, I think there's a wider discussion. And this is kind of why I really was looking forward to the live portion of this with all of you guys here. Hey, buddy. Jonas as well. Hi, thank you for stopping by. I hate everything and nothing is good. I know, you're just still upset that Elder Scrolls Legends is canceled. I'm sorry. It's time to move on. Well, it wasn't canceled. It's just no more updates for it. So, in a basket of bad eggs be the bacon. That's a very good expression, actually. I've never heard that one before. Why would bacon be in the basket of bad eggs, though? Why can't it be in the basket of good eggs? I would love to hear your input on Tainted Grail and the fall of Avalon. I have no opinion on Tainted Grail, the fall of Avalon, unfortunately, buddy. Cannot speak to it. Cannot. Sorry. So, I've been very much, as far as sort of everything going on lately, I've been very much kind of in my own bubble. So, this is also an effort to kind of branch out of that a little bit, because, of course, if you guys have things that are worth looking into and that you want to spend time investigating, then by all means. So, in talking about sort of the good and the bad about Starfield and what makes it a good or a bad game, I also think it's important to address, and this is kind of a deeper level of conversation, which is why I was excited for the live portion of this, which is talking about what is an RPG and defining, because spoiler alert, you really can't define it, and there's so many subgenres that to say this is definitively what an RPG is in 2023 I think is impossible. But there is a conversation to be had around what defines a good, strong RPG versus a weaker, light style RPG. And that's when you start getting into some of the subgenres. Of course, we're going to get ads every once in a while, so enjoy quiet ears, apparently. Whatever that was. So, yeah, we just have some Sky Oblivion going on in the background. We're going to get ads every once in a while. But first and foremost, I wanted to kind of talk about some of the departures at Bethesda. With Pete Hines leaving, first off, we have to all wish him congratulations. I know that it was kind of, some people really didn't like him, some people loved him, some people really didn't care anyway, which way. I know that for most people, probably what stands out is, if you're not fond of Pete Hines, what most likely stands out to you guys are the JFC comments when people were sort of really getting on board with, I don't remember if it was Fallout 76 anymore or if it was about Starfield. It was Fallout 76, I think, in relation to. And Pete Hines steps out and just says, hey, you guys enjoy your disappointment, JFC. And just effing chill. And people were really angry and saying, how could someone at Bethesda say this? That's not okay. That shouldn't be allowed. You represent the company, so on and so forth. I said this the other day. If you guys are interested, every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I join Red Wolf Renegade, Assassin, who's here, and myself. We do the Renegade Realm podcast, which is just kind of a weekly gaming news podcast that you can stop by if you're interested. I did bring this up there, but one of the things I feel is that there is this level of gamer entitlement that's sort of been growing as of late. It's been present for a while, but it's gotten a little bit worse in recent years, I would argue. Exactly, Jake. Exactly. I wanted to have this conversation because you and I had a really great one. Interestingly, I actually had a similar conversation with somebody in the Arcane Realms Discord, where I even just copied and pasted parts of our conversation together, what I said into that, because I didn't want to retype a lot of it. And so they actually disagreed with some of those points, and they stood by the fact that Starfield is a stellar RPG. It is great, it is amazing, and it does all of the best RPG. Not to that extent, I'm completely paraphrasing. But there are those people that exist that think Starfield is definitively a phenomenal RPG game. And I wanted to dive in discussing, is Starfield a good game? Is it a bad game? Of course, that's all subjective, but why that might be the case. With Pete Hines leaving, we have to say, I respect him for kind of going back to the community and saying, we're not going to let you walk all over us, and we're not going to let you talk to us with this amount of disrespect. There's a level of... There's a certain point where everybody who's watching the stream, anybody who might watch it on demand, myself, all of you guys, you all know that harassing developers is wrong. A game comes out, it has something broken, it has things you don't like, you don't write to the developers with things like death threats and insult them and just harass them. That's the wrong thing to do. But there's only so many, but people still do it. There's only so many times that we could keep turning around and saying, hey, be nice to developers. You guys should be nice to developers. It's it's sort of like, hey, just stop it. Don't do that, man. That's mean. And the person's gonna look at you and go, okay, you suck to the next developer they see. It's so there's only so much of a threshold that's acceptable, and there's only so many times we could keep saying, hey man, you should be nice to developers, please, before someone needs to take a bit of a harder stance. I think Pete sometimes took that harder stance, and I very deeply respect him for it. And of course, the other thing too about Pete Hines is he loved the community. He loved Bethesda games. He loved everything he worked on. He loved being with that studio. He loved all the, there's few, and again, I said this on the Renegade Realm podcast, but there are few people like Pete at his level within a company that are going to take time to do things semi-frequently with, say, Chad, a Fallout 76 podcast, who has raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for charity for St. Jude Children's Hospital, and Pete Hines would be a regular appearance to help support those charity live streams. So there's only few people in his position that would do that, but he was one of them, and I have a lot of respect for that. So wishing Pete Hines a good retirement and hope everything works well for him. But as for Will Shen, he left to go visit Something Wicked Games. I say visit. He's now employed by Something Wicked Games. He just joined that studio, and that's a pretty big shakeup for Bethesda because, again, on Renegade Realm podcast, I was having discussions where myself and the host of the show, Red Wolf Renegade, we were talking about how we both saw a path forward, a universe in which Will Shen would become the new Todd Howard. If Todd Howard said, that's it, I'm out, see you later, goodbye, and he was gone, Will Shen had the passion. He's been at the studio for a long time. He's worked across some of their most successful projects, and I genuinely felt as though in some universe he would be able to lead Bethesda. Did someone say intellectual? That's what we're going with. Growing against the grain. And let me know if you think this is too stupid. By all means, let me know. So, he's gone and left Something Wicked Games. They're working on a project called Wyrdsong. Just today, I put out a community post that was saying, hey, I really want to talk more about Wyrdsong and Something Wicked Games. Do you Do you know what that is? Like, are you looking forward to it? And a lot of people, it was around 50% of people who had voted for that poll said, what the heck is a Wyrdsong? They don't know what the game is, which is understandable because all that we've seen of it, again, I apologize for the ads that we're going to get throughout, but we're giving Skyblivion developers some money. We're helping with their project with every ad that plays, so it's a good thing. Welcome, Growing. Thank you for stopping by. So a lot of people do not know what Wyrdsong is. Something Wicked Games is a studio that was founded by Jeff Gardner, who worked on a lot of Bethesda games. He left after Fallout 76. He was the lead on that title, among many other projects. But he left, he formed his own studio, and he got industry veterans across, for example, the lead level designer and lead project manager, I believe his name, Chris Staple, who worked at Obsidian Entertainment, is now there. Will Shen is now there. Former BioWare devs are there. Other Obsidian developers are there as well. It is a massive, massive conglomeration of some really, really talented people. And to see a studio like that grow, you have a lot of ambition. There's a lot of high expectations that can come from it. Just to give you some groundwork of what Something Wicked Games is doing, they're working on a title. It's an alternate history title set in Spain, somewhere in Spain, I believe. And it's alternate history in the sense that there's also kind of these more magical, more mystical traveling. Portugal, thank you, Jonas. Traveling between realms and worlds and all these different things to create this kind of magical mess with the players and subvert their expectations, kind of overall, I would say, trippy experience. And so it seems really cool on principle. There haven't been a lot of updates for it. The only thing that we've seen so far of the game, we have 2 developer diary updates that are on their website, and then we also have a small teaser trailer that was done, I think it was at Gamescom, was when that was shown off. So there's really not much going on with it as of yet. But the team is now at around 40 people. So it's growing strong, and again, more talent keeps coming into that studio. And one of the highlights for it, if you're not sold, you go, all right, I don't really care about Wyrdsong. Sure, it's alternate history, set in Portugal, whatever. One of the things that might interest a lot of, I know, my viewers would be that Jeff Gardner explicitly called out there's going to be, while they're still trying to frame and work out what the actual game is, they're working on kind of their vertical slice to define and get the full picture going forward. But one element that Jeff Gardner explicitly called out was they want to have the Obsidian level of dialogue, choice and consequence, real impact on the world and worlds, massive impact where you really feel like you have had huge affecting decisions across the entire world, which is, again, that's going to bleed into, keep that in mind, because that's going to bleed into our conversation about RPGs that I do want to have. And so, yeah, what did I say? Obsidian dialogue, Obsidian choice and consequence, the last thing was the sort of gray nature and, you know, really kind of blurring the lines between good and bad, and there's no right or wrong option, so blending those lines, and that is some of the core elements that Jeff Gardner is trying to capture, at least from a narrative perspective. Seems the people inside BGS who want what fans have asked for years went their own way to do those things. Exactly. So that, we're going to touch on that. We're definitely going to touch on that. So that is what Wyrdsong is. A lot of developers moved on to that project. Then we get to Starfield. And Jake and I, who's here, thank you for being here, Jake, we had a long conversation about this on Discord where we were talking about what makes a good RPG, because you pose a title like Baldur's Gate 3 against Starfield, and there's people who are saying genuinely, and I can to some extent agree with this, and you guys let me know if you think it's completely wrong or it's an unfair comparison, but several folks feel as though launching Starfield so close to Baldur's Gate 3 is actually a bad thing, because it's, and this is just my opinion, but it is one of the best RPGs I've ever played, alongside the other Larian game that I would consider my favorite RPG of all time, which is Divinity 2. So what separates that from what Bethesda is doing, and why is Bethesda seeing, this is not the first time that we've seen a lot of studio members leave, especially for a studio that prides itself on retention, Bethesda. We've seen, of course, Jeff Gardner. We've now seen Will Shen. Nate Perkapile went off to fulfill his own game. He's making this heavy metal hunting game, which seems really interesting, where you're kind of going after these mythical creatures. So that seems pretty interesting. And of course, a lot of names that we wouldn't necessarily know on a first name basis have sort of moved on. You also had, which was interesting, the woman who had announced Ghostwire Tokyo, and right after the announcement, she moved on and she actually started working at Sony. So, why is that? And I'm curious what you guys think as to why that might be the case, but one of the theories that I had come up with is because Bethesda has shifted so far in its focus. Bethesda started as, if you look at what people like, and it's very appropriate that we have Sky Oblivion going on in the background, when you look at, for example, what Oblivion did, it was fairly straightforward. Akumi Nakamura, she doesn't work at Sony, she made her own studio, Unseen. See, Assassin, you are intelligent. That's why I need you here. Because you remember these things. So, you look at Oblivion, and a game like Oblivion was, you go off, you kill some fantasy creatures, you get loot, you explore dungeons, you have the factions, you have the quest lines, you have the open world, but that was the game. And then Fallout 4 started drifting a lot more into the, Skyrim introduced some crafting. Fallout 4 went very heavy into the crafting, which is a good thing, but then you also start having more of, as Jonas said just now, these sandboxy elements. Now you have the shipbuilding mechanics, you have the house building, you have the settlement and the outposts. You put in all of these different systems where now it's less of what Oblivion was and more of a new entity in and of itself. And they feel very separate. While you can play Starfield and you could go through those main quest lines, and you do feel as though immersion, yes, a Bethesda game, all RPGs need immersion, but whereas you can go through and have a very clean-cut, defined experience for what Oblivion is, I think it's much easier to identify what a game like Oblivion is versus what a game like Starfield is. If you had to explain them both to people, you're going to have more of a challenge, generally speaking, to explain Starfield. So is Bethesda starting to weigh too much into, as Jonas, you said, are they weighing too heavily into the sandbox side of things? And some would argue yes, some would argue no. I think other people would argue that it's just shifting to a new audience. So it's neither good nor bad. It's just the direction that Bethesda is going in. What is the question again? Hi, DeMarco. Long time no see. First time watching someone covered Starfield since the game came out. Well, I'm assuming you've been enjoying it very much. We're sort of drifting on why is Starfield... We're in the middle of topics, kind of talking on to why is Starfield people saying it's a really good game? Why are some people saying it's really bad? And what defines kind of a good and a bad RPG? Oliver, I love the sandbox elements in BGS games personally, and a lot of people agree with you. That's why I'm saying, is it necessarily, of course it's going to be subjectively a good or bad thing on an individual level, right? Per person, whether Bethesda drifting more into these sandboxy elements will be good or bad. And as I was saying, I kind of cut myself off, but you can play Starfield, and if you just go through a lot of the quest lines and you just do the factions and you go through the dialogue and you're talking NPCs, there is, you feel that identity of something like Oblivion. And it even just dawned on me, even if you look at, for example, the menus, when you kind of have the interface that Starfield uses and you need to individually sort between, this buy versus this sell menu. Is anybody hungry for Pizza Hut? We're supporting the Sky Oblivion team. With every, and there you go, beautiful Todd Howard. With every ad that we watch, we support Skyblivion just a little bit more. So, oh fudge, where was I? Yeah, so you look at the menu elements of Starfield 2, and it actually is more reminiscent of Oblivion, because if you remember in Oblivion, you sort of had these two tabs, whether you wanted to buy or sell, versus what Skyrim did, where they were both viewable kind of in the same pane by scrolling, or what Fallout does, which I think is the best way, where you just have them straight up side by side. And so you can see your stuff and the vendor stuff. And when I kind of realized that, wait, Starfield actually emulates a little bit more closely to Oblivion in that regard, I was like, hey, there's some of that connection too. So all of this comes down to if Bethesda is working more towards creating that sandbox experience, again, I think it's just going to target a new audience. And what does that mean for the Elder Scrolls 6? Probably some of the same. But I don't think a lot of people are saying, well, it's doom and gloom for Elder Scrolls 6 because it's coming from the people who didn't like Starfield. It's going to be doom and gloom for Elder Scrolls 6 because Starfield did all these things wrong and I didn't like X, Y, and Z. And so I have zero faith now in the Elder Scrolls 6. I would argue, for anyone who might feel that way, or if you ever encounter someone who feels that way, now I want pizza. Thanks. I have been craving pizza for several days now, and I refrain from getting it because every time I look at it, it's just greasy, delicious, cheesy goodness. I just feel gross. And I don't get it. I don't get it. As in, I don't buy it. But I've been wanting it. Eventually, I'll cave. I don't play BGS games as a substitute for something like Satisfactory. No, and you can't. You can't substitute any Bethesda game for something like Satisfactory. But that's sort of where I think some of the problem lies, right? If Bethesda wants to have the sandbox experience, it needs to commit to the sandbox experience, because you're getting this division of interest. And I think Starfield, I'm not saying it's impossible to strike the balance, but I think Starfield definitely shows that it wants to be this thing, but it also wants to be this thing, and there's this conflicting tug in different directions as to where its identity truly lies. So, does it want to be that full-on RPG? Does it want to be this grand experience that you can do all 100% everything that you would possibly want to do across several different genres, where it is 5 games crammed into one? What does it want to be? And I think in that regard, it's having a bit of an identity crisis. And as a result, what people are seeing, if I had to categorize why I think there's so much discourse over Starfield, I would arguably say, by the way, I do see a lot of people who are stopping in. Welcome, by the way, thank you for being here. And also, we're just generally talking about what makes Starfield a good or a bad game, and why that is the case, and why does it feel as though this game has been very, very kind of mixed as to its reception. But I think that if I had to boil down my overall feelings as to why this game is sort of as conflicting as I've seen it, and again, I have to say, my comment section has you guys are generally really great. The people who are going to join this stream are probably some of the people that I appreciate having on the channel a lot more, because I know you guys are positive and I know you kind of understand my take and the way that I try to talk about games. But my comment section as of late has been very heavily dominated by just people who are aggressively trying to say how much they have disdain for Bethesda, and at the root of it, I think the problem is because it's trying all these different things, it's not succeeding too great in any of them. So, in my opinion, Test 6 will carry very little of Starfield new mechanics. That's actually what I think is one of Starfield's greatest strengths, and something that I feel as though Bethesda maybe could have done a better job explaining, was Bethesda might have gotten caught in a little bit of a trap, and tell me if you agree or disagree with this. Bethesda, I believe, might have gotten caught in a little bit of a trap where Fallout 76 had come out. They're still trying to reassure fans that they're on the right track, and they were doing that by saying, hey, we have all these RPG elements. Look at, it's like Oblivion. It's like Skyrim in space. And so people got this idea in their head. They're thinking, oh my god, we're gonna get to do Skyrim in space. I love Skyrim. That's one of my favorite games. And keep in mind, that's when a lot of people became fans of Bethesda, was with Skyrim. So they were saying, oh, this is gonna be amazing. I can't wait. And then it comes out and it's not really that. And it feels different and it feels unique. But if Bethesda would have approached it and said, no, this is its own thing. Yes, it's going to have what you like about Oblivion. It's going to have what you like about Starfield. And we're looking to those games for inspiration. But it's its own thing. Because I think one thing that Starfield really has going for it is it feels unique. You have those elements of past games, but it feels genuinely as though it exists within its own bubble. It has a unique identity from those other games. So you're not hopping into Starfield and you don't jump into Starfield and say, man, I can't wait to play Skyrim in space. You hop into Starfield and say, man, I can't wait to play Starfield. And you hop into Fallout, and Fallout has its own unique identity because it's always sort of had that more goriness, right? The heads exploding and arms and limbs and all that stuff. And you have that more dark comedic humor that goes into it versus an Elder Scrolls game, which is very Tolkien-esque, which is very high fantasy, and it's very much more contained within this bustling world, and that's where I think Elder Scrolls 6 might struggle, right? So, as you said, who was it? Danilo, as you said, I don't think some of the new mechanics will carry over to Elder Scrolls 6, but there's several things I think that would worry me. Is Bethesda going to try to stretch the map of the Elder Scrolls 6 so massive? Because some people are saying, man, I would love to get, based on what Starfield did, and this is probably coming from people who really like Starfield, but they're saying, based on what Starfield did with the 1,000 planets, do you know how easy it would be for Bethesda to do what Arena did and make the entirety of Tamriel in one game and you could go explore all? No. Bad idea, Bethesda. To me. Individual opinions will vary. And if Bethesda tries to spread it out on that massive, massive scope, that's one of the things I think would actually work to the detriment of the Elder Scrolls 6 for a couple reasons. One, because you're going to directly negate what all of the people who are more largely complaining about that element of Starfield, of which there are many who think the planets feel lifeless and barren. That's exactly what you would get with an arena version of the Elder Scrolls 6. And on top of that, you are drifting away again. I think why Starfield can, in the future, I genuinely think Starfield will be one of those games that years from now, like, for example, Cyberpunk, where Cyberpunk launched, everyone hated it. Well, not everyone, but a lot of people were like, bad game, buggy, horrible, broken, lack of features, broken promises, etc., etc. Starfield, I think, and now people look at Cyberpunk and they go, man, it's amazing, I love it. Of course, 2.0 helped a lot with that. And I'll address chat in a little bit. I see, thank you guys for staying here. Thank you for chatting and seeing your opinions and sharing in the chat. But I think Starfield will see very much something similar because people will realize it has its own identity. And if Bethesda tries to pull an arena with the Elder Scrolls 6, where it is that massive, you're now diluting the identity that Starfield can have to distinguish itself from those other franchises and from those other IPs. So, do with that what you will. I think the scale and the scope of the world in Starfield is good for Starfield, but I wouldn't want to see that transferred over to other games. I know that we're kind of really bouncing between topics here. ADD, drink it and convert it to pee. So I apologize. But if you are following, congratulations. You're just as wrinkly brained as I am and you're able to keep up. Alright, I do want to catch up on some of what you guys had said. Here's what people need to understand. Starfield is not the Elder Scrolls 6. Starfield is new IP. Elder Scrolls is not. They know how to do that universe after 20 plus years. I think that's, yes, Assassin, definitively. That's going to be one of the elements that, it's why I think that the identity of these games is so important. Because, again, you can look at Starfield, and it's okay that people hate Starfield. It's okay that people don't like it. But you need to understand, and I think Bethesda, and I'm not sure if they're doing this, I really wish at some point I could sit down and I could ask them. I would love to get a direct answer to this question. Do you treat each of these games, and how do you approach each of these games now that you have Starfield, separately? And what are the elements that define each of them uniquely? And on a gameplay level, not just in a theme and how they feel and the tone. We know the tone, Todd, of some of these games. On a gameplay level, yes, we wanted Starfield to be this open. Yes, we know that Elder Scrolls players like the smaller, more crafted worlds, and we're going to design as such with Elder Scrolls 6. Because I think that one of the biggest elements Bethesda needs to address, and kind of the elephant in the room, is are they going to start making these franchise for individual audiences? It's no longer about, and here's my question for all of you. Do you agree, yes or no? Bethesda games should not be developed in such a way where we need to make games for Bethesda fans. We need to make Fallout for Bethesda fans. We need to make Starfield for Bethesda fans. We need to make Elder Scrolls. I think, and I strongly believe, that the new mentality needs to be with each of these projects. No, we need to make an Elder Scrolls game for Elder Scrolls fans. And yes, it has Bethesda identity, which means you're going to have the open world, some of those sandboxing elements, the way that factions are done, you know, the leveling up and the perks and all that stuff. But we're going to make an Elder Scrolls game for Elder Scrolls fans, a Starfield game for the Starfield fans, and that's the way that they should approach it. Let's see what else. It does about everything but nothing to its full potential. Starfield does about everything but nothing to its full potential. Yeah, I think that's why it's divisive. Magic, I didn't say hi to you. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. Hello, if you're still here. Oh yes, quite the pickle. Indeed. You are still here. There you go. Jolly well said, good sir. Let them follow the vision. Screw the bloody critics. Bethesda BGM is Lord of the Rings. BGS is Lord of the Rings? I'm afraid that Todd is thinking too big and broad, that he wants all of Tamriel as his magnum opus, but it becomes shallow because it's too macro and not enough detail level. Yeah, we all know that Todd is ambitious, but ambitious... Oh, background music. That is the first time I did not know BGM background music. Thank you, because I am stupid and I don't keep up with pop culture, and well, that's not even a pop culture thing. I don't keep up with modern slang, even though that's also not modern slang. I'm an idiot. That's what I'm trying to say. I find it the best one Bethesda did since Oblivion for a long shot. The RPG is way better than the last 3 games in Starfield. Interesting take. The background music, yeah, I could send the background music to you though. Yeah, Bethesda is trying to go for this massive world for his magnum opus. That is the question, right? He wanted the ultimate fantasy game simulator, and I think part of that would be, in my opinion, being able to travel across all these different regions, across an entire continent, and explore the world the way you potentially could in a D&D game, right? Which, of course, Elder Scrolls was just their version of D&D. That was what it was originally started out as. So what I would hope that Bethesda tries to do is, we've already speculated about this, but the potentiality of Hammerfell and High Rock, both of those continents in one game. Because between those two biomes, you have a lot of the high fantasy with High Rock. You get a lot of kind of that, what would you call it? That King Arthur style, England, kings and lords type feeling, vibe to it. And then with Hammerfell, you also have the what is it called? The Craglorn Mountains, I believe, that are in the top there. The Dragon Thorn Mountains, the mountain range that's up on in the northeast, kind of bordering with Skyrim. And then you have Hammerfell for the desert. So you have, and then you also have some jungles there that are there as well. So you have a lot of different biomes to play around with. And you could get all that, you know, you could get all that vibe. Hey Arcane, how's it going? How you doing? Thank you for stopping by. We should have an inkling about the game issue when Todd said they did not find the game loop until 1 year's out of launch. We should have had an inkling about the game issue. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that 100%. Yes, you could argue that it's falling to kind of that BioWare magic that, you know, everyone sort of memes now, but in this case, Bethesda magic that pieces it all together in that last bit. But I do believe part of it is sort of that's the nature of game development. Like, that's a lot more common than a lot of people might realize in game development based on what I constantly see, and the more I listen to developers talk about certain aspects of the games and the game development process. So, but for Elder Scrolls, if we hear something similar, I think you're in a bit more trouble because that is an established franchise. Esoteric. Why, certainly, my jolly superlative plitoplastic confidant. That is, without reservation, a peculiar inquiry to make. I certainly concede in the company of similar thoughts. Well, I do appreciate... I should need to get my top hat. Indeed, good sir, I do appreciate your contemplation of these matters, both sophisticated and banal. So, Danilo, you've been saying the RPG elements are the best so far, it's just that space is not for their engine. If it was for test... Their RPG elements are the best so far. Take the time to write out why, because now's a good moment to branch into what defines a good RPG, and it's going to be different for everyone. So for those of you that think Starfield did the best RPG mechanics they possibly could have, let me know why. And Jonas, I saw that you said Baldur's Gate 3 versus Starfield is not a fair comparison. But what defines a good RPG? And why is it impossible to define an RPG in 2023? Well, it's impossible to find one because the RPG genre has absorbed so many different aspects from so many different areas. This is the first thing I think you need to talk about if you're going to have this conversation. The RPG genre has taken so many elements from so many different areas that it is impossible to define what an individual RPG is. It's not. There's so many subgenres, right? That's why you have action RPGs. That's why JRPGs are, Japanese, but they're kind of in their own bucket there. That's why you have isometric RPGs, story-driven RPGs. And of course, the biggest one that we commonly see is, for example, like action RPGs. So you look at something, for example, like Red Dead. Is Red Dead Redemption an RPG game? Versus The Witcher 3? Versus Skyrim? Versus Baldur's Gate 3? So I don't think it's possible to truly define what an RPG is. And everyone's going to impose their own beliefs on it. However, and I have a couple notes because I wanted to try to get this as clear as possible. So, my personal list of elements that create an RPG. A big one is, does it need character customization? Do you need to be able to make your own character? No. I don't think so. Do I think character customization and having unique character makes for a better RPG? Yes. Absolutely. 1000%. But I don't think it's a necessity. I could sit down and I could play The Witcher, and I still feel when I'm playing The Witcher that I am playing what I would say is an action RPG game. So that's one of the first steps. And when I say character customization, I mean being able to build them from scratch, right? Change their shape, their face, what they look like, all that stuff. That's what I mean by character creation, not like picking skills and stuff. That leads to the second stuff, right? Skill trees. You kind of need skill trees to some capacity in an RPG game. because that's how you define the growth of your character, more or less. Choice and consequence. Do you need to have influence over the game world? Yes, in some capacity. So that would take a game like Spider-Man out, like Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2, out of the RPG genre, because there's no influence over the world. Yes, if you look at RPG role-playing game, it is at its core the ability to inject yourself into that character. And yes, I can feel as though I'm like Spider-Man, but you don't have any when I play Spider-Man, but you don't have any direct influence over what he does and how the narrative shapes as a result of things that you do. Ergo, I would not consider Spider-Man an RPG game, personally. An action game? Yes. Non-RPG. So you do need to have some level of influence on the world and how it shapes. But the real caveat to me as to what defines a good RPG game versus a bad one falls down to the consequence part. And that is where, because I see, for example, Danilo, you said Starfield gives you way more options. Your skills, background, traits can influence quests and stuff. Yes. The consequence for me is what separates a good role-playing game from an okay role-playing game. It's the consequence. You can have as many choices as you possibly want. Look at, for example, some of the Telltale games. Tons of choice. Some consequence. Some consequence. Dom, how is it going? Welcome. Thanks for stopping by. It's a pleasure to get to have you here. Dom, we need to talk about doing a discussion again like we used to. We need to get you talking about games again. Is that a remix of The Last of Us I hear in the background? It is indeed. It's a lo-fi remix of The Last of Us. But it's the consequence. And so what I will say is, in that regard, Starfield and all of Bethesda games actually always, in my opinion, have struggled with that. They're great with choice. Bethesda games are phenomenal with choice. You can choose what factions to join. You can choose in Starfield how some of it plays out. You have some influence over who lives and dies in the faction quest lines of Starfield. You can choose what elements of the game you engage with. You can choose your background, and you can choose your traits, right? Bethesda games do great with the choice. But why doesn't it reach the same level as a Baldur's Gate as far as a defining what the RPG experience is for myself and many others? Because the consequence isn't there. So once you do those things, it is more or less completely inconsequential to the world as a whole. Great, I helped in Skyrim. Great, I helped the Stormcloaks. Okay. The Stormcloaks won the Civil War. Now what? They control some of the forts? Some of the Jarls changed? Is that going to change the state of the game? No. The characters who live in those places still live in those places. It's not as though now that for example, now that the Stormcloaks have won the Civil War in Skyrim, that all of, like the Argonians are kicked out of Riften, for example, because obviously you go and you look at Windhelm in Skyrim, the Argonians aren't allowed in the city. None of that changes. It's not as though people leave. You don't see, for example, all the Dark Elves say, nope, we're out, we're gone. And then you get kind of, Windhelm is completely shaken up because the Grey Quarter in Windhelm is just gone. The Dark Elves do not want to be a part of it now that, the Stormcloaks won the Civil War. These aren't the best examples I could possibly give, and I'm sure that many of you can think of better ones. But my point being that there is some dramatic impact to the rest of the game that absolutely affects what you can and can't do. Because yes, quests are gonna fail. You're going to lose some. You're not going to be able to engage with others. That to me defines a fantastic RPG. And this is coming as a player, the Stormcloaks already destroyed this. Yeah, so that's part of Jonas why I was wondering if someone was going to bring that up. I guess what I would say, just to kind of prove my point in this pointless argument, is that now the Dark Elves don't even have hope that the Empire can possibly step in and say, hey, you can't treat them this way. Like, you gotta do something about this, right? There's absolutely zero hope. Things will probably get worse for them now that all the Imperials are kicked out of Skyrim, and Skyrim is for the Nords, and that kind of message is going to be permeated no matter where they go in Skyrim, so they just decide up and leave. So, I guess that's kind of where my head was at, but let's see. Baldur's Gate is a CRPG. They are other type in that case. Pathfinder, Wrath of the Righteous have way more consequences than Baldur's Gate 3, for example. I haven't played Pathfinder, which I know is wrong, and I should do that. But yeah, you are still looking at a different genre, and it's important to keep in mind when, for example, you look at like Baldur's Gate or any games like that are very controlled, right? One of the problems that Bethesda games always struggle with is that their worlds are incredibly dynamic, where yes, the dragon can just fly in out of nowhere and say, hey, here's the dragon, it's coming, start burning the city, landing on buildings, killing the population. It happens. So in a game like Baldur's Gate, that doesn't happen, right? When you get into encounters, yeah, you can attack any NPC in the game, and you could just go up and attack this random shopkeeper, and then all of the people around you will sort of respond as a result, and they'll probably come after you and attack you because they all have, I think the way that Larian designs their games, every NPC sort of has a defined relationship with every other NPC. Like, they might be given a label like, this is citizen, and so you attack one citizen and all nearby citizens will come. So that is, I guess, where the dynamic elements, but again, you never get, like, if a dragon were to ever just run into your game in Baldur's Gate, it's because it was scripted and told to do so. If you get into a combat situation, it's because it was told, at this point, combat will happen, and these are enemies in this area. So it's a lot more planned out and coordinated versus a Bethesda world. So that is part of the problem. There is no randomness in a CRPG. There is some, you could argue there's some based on the way that the player approaches a situation. So for example, if you play a game like Baldur's Gate and you decide, I'm going to sneak up, or I don't know, some people have seen the video where somebody just completely flooded the entire goblin base in Baldur's Gate 3 with explosive barrels, and the whole thing just exploded like a Christmas tree lighting up. He's right, DeMarco, those dice rolls are rigged. They specifically put in rig the dice rolls, don't rig the dice rolls option. There's explicitly an option in Baldur's Gate 3 for that. But yeah, I think so. Yeah, as Jonas, you said, there's the world state doesn't change, and that to me is where the true element, that is what I would want Bethesda games to lean more into. Definitively that aspect of their games, because if they can, then it's going to be a lot. It's going to play a lot more into what I think the audience is hoping for, especially when Bethesda turned around and said, yeah, we are focusing more on these RPG elements with Starfield, which they did. I love the trait system. I love the backgrounds. They need to do that for the Elder Scrolls 6, 1000%. And if they don't, they are making a massive mistake. However, that being said, I would want to see them go a little bit further. No, they don't need to kill every single NPC, right? I think that's really kind of I've always found that to be just a stupid argument. Why can't I kill every single one? Maybe more of them should be killable, but that's not what's ruining your experience. I'm sorry, and if you think it is, then that's my argument. I think that they are too small to cover everything. Who, Bethesda? Oh, good gracious heavens, what an utterly inverted triangle of piffle indeed. Yes, I do concur. With this character's death, the thread of prophecy is severed. Restore a save game to restore the weave of fate, or persist in the doomed world you have created. You would want it to play out that way, wouldn't you? Like, we want that to be the way it works, but unfortunately, that isn't. That isn't. And you think back, and the reason why I think this is so important, like the change of world state is so important, is because I failed to comprehend why Bethesda has never done. There's one example, and I know you guys can get it. There's one example that everybody always gives of one of the best kind of decisions and choices you could make in a Bethesda game. Any Bethesda game. And it's always referred to as like the choice. And everybody, I have no idea why Bethesda has never attempted to do it again. Or anything of that level ever again. Even though it's garnered so much respect and praise. And I'll give you 3 seconds to think in your minds what you think it is. 2, 1. Exactly, Oliver. Exactly. Megaton. Bethesda has never done another Megaton. Why? Why? That is the element of the game they get so much praise for. That's one of the best choices that they've ever made. And yet still, even Starfield, as far as I know so far, has not done anything to that level. I'm glad some NPCs are unkillable. An NPC could die by some dragon attack and then the game is ruined. Exactly. That's stressful. And the problem with it, like, again, Baldur's Gate, you can kill any NPC. Every single one in the game is killable, but there's a little bit more control that you have in those types of games, because it is turn-based. Because of the turn-based nature of them, there's a bit more control. What I think, yes, Jonas, that's exactly what I was going to get into. What I think is they need to apply the idea that if you're the one that deals the final blow to an NPC, they will die. That is your fault. I also think that there's a level of smarter AI that can be incorporated. For example, if the AI, an NPC in an ideal situation would be able to register, hey, there is a dragon attacking. A dragon has a difficulty rating of, say, 15. I have a difficulty rating of 3 because I am, like, I don't know, I'm Nazim. So no, I'm not going to go punch this dragon. Right? And they do kind of do that, but not that well. They could be a little bit smarter too, where they get to half health, and then once an NPC gets to half health, they do try to run away. And then if you really want to take a step further, and this is me armchair developing, I have no idea how easy or hard this is to do. But if they really wanted to take a step further, then the AI could recognize if dragon has this targets to go for, prioritize these ones. Or if dragon is targeting NPC that decides, if dragon is targeting NPC and NPC starts running away, do not target NPC anymore. Go for a new one. Right? So, I think there are, and again, that's me armchair developing. I do think that there are ways that they can try to incorporate some of this into it to make it feel a little bit better, and to add some of that risk. But bottom line is, having all your NPCs killable, I don't think is the solution. I think it's just a band-aid over the bigger problem, which is there needs to be deeper consequence. And there were things like, for example, in Starfield, minor spoiler for one of the side quests in Starfield, if you are concerned. Even the way that you approach quests and this is kind of the other thoughts on Pete Hines or thoughts on Will Shen leaving Bethesda. I will address that. We kind of already touched on it a bit, but oh wait, well, we could definitely dive further into that conversation. I don't think we touched everything on it, but should have killed the dragon faster. In BGS, the protected state where NPC... Reaper, hey, how's it going? I don't think I said hi to you. I did see you earlier. Make no mistake, Starfield is modern Bethesda's first jab at world building from scratch. Look at their results. People who wrote the foundation for Fallout world building never worked in the company. Bethesda bought the IP. Yeah, we could definitely talk about the state of world. I think that Starfield is ripe to improve as far as world building goes. You know, you look at a game like Elder Scrolls, and that has had years and years and years and years and years to build and refine and truly build what its identity is today, versus Starfield, which had to lay all that groundwork on top of create this awesome, incredible experience that it wanted to try to do. And that's a big challenge. So with a potential Starfield sequel, now that you already have all those details figured out, you don't have to spend as much time doing that, and you could flesh the world outward more, which I think is going to be a massive improvement to the game as a whole. The protected state where an NPC will die by player action. Some NPCs are marked like that compared to Essential. Nothing can kill them. Yeah, some of them are like that. Some of them are like that. So, what was it? There's one other element that I did want to touch on, which will hopefully come back to me. We were talking about choice and consequence. Oh yes, the ways that you could pursue. This is another thing too that I think holds Starfield back from being a good game to a great game, and that is largely the way that you're able to tackle certain elements of the game. So, all right. So, what would hold Bethesda? A lot of people saying Bethesda's. I know, Danola, you said you liked it, for example. What would hold Starfield back from being, in my opinion, a phenomenal RPG game? And that is the lack of ways you can approach a situation. There's not that many. So, and also the way that you play characters, I think is super important. And one area that I would want to see Bethesda move more towards for future projects is definitively, thank you, bless me, everybody bless me, cast bless. No, don't use your spell slot for that. So, when you look at, for example, leveling up in a Bethesda game, what it's devolved into, and I think that a lot of players have problems with, is the fact that, and I've discussed this again, I discussed this at length with Jake, is the fact that the game does not require you, or the game assumes that every character is going to be able to do absolutely everything. This is one of the key factors that I think separates Bethesda games from being an RPG. Just, yeah, it has RPG elements to being an RPG game, right? So, in Bethesda, the way the game is built is in such a way that every single character can do absolutely every single thing in the game. And you guys let me know if you agree or disagree with this as well. Every single character can do every single thing in the game. And that, in theory, is done because it gives you more choice, right? I can play as, let's just use Elder Scrolls because it's the example that I'm most antiquated with, familiar with. In Skyrim, I can play the heavily armored, spell-casting assassin. Right? I can do that. And so you have the idea of choice, that because you can do all these different things, you could truly play how you want. I would argue, and Reaper, this is more what I was talking about. I would argue that what really that does is actually limits your choice. And it limits your choice because then every single element of the game is built with that design in mind. So when you get to a locked door in Starfield, you have two options. pick the door or don't pick the door. And if you don't pick the door, you'll never find out what's behind the door. Maybe you find a key card somewhere, like there's a NPC that was carrying it, or the boss of the dungeon was carrying it. But those are your two options, and it's done that way because it can. And why can it? Because every single character is able to lockpick the door, and every single character can take perks to lockpick the door. So, but when you bench, that's just a simple example, right? When you spread that across every single element of the game, every single character can cast a spell. Every single character can heal, can use a healing spell. Every single character can do anything that you possibly want. You're not providing more choice. You're limiting it. You're limiting it in the ways that actually matter. Because now I don't have the choice as to how I approach getting through this door. And again, that is the simplest example, kind of the low-hanging fruit that I could use manipulation and tell the guard to unlock it. If there's a guard to be manipulated. But what I'm more so getting at is there in an ideal situation, there would be 5 different ways to approach getting through that door. And again, the door is a metaphor for a lot of different aspects, right? Let's say this door is blocking the entrance to a dungeon. I want to get into this dungeon because I want to explore it. And this is an example I was having with Jake when I was discussing it yesterday. Option number 1, the door is locked. Option number 1, I lockpick the door. You know, I kill the guard that's standing. Let's say there's a guard in front of it. I kill the guard standing in front of it, lockpick the door, get through. Cool, that's 1. Option number 2, we do that. We manipulate the guard to unlock the door for us, and now we can get in. Cool, you have 2. Different ways you can approach it. That doesn't feel as though that the problem again comes down to, and this is the important fact, or the important factor, is the consequence. The consequence of both of those actions is I need to get through door, I get through door. That's it. There's no consequence. Versus, what if I was able to find, for example, and again, you would be able to accomplish this, you would need to spread out and diversify your characters a lot more. So if I was playing a wizard versus playing a knight versus playing a rogue, if I was playing a wizard, I walk past and there is a statue that's nearby. And I'm able to, because I'm playing a mage type character, I'm able to sense some magical energy that's coming from this statue. And if I manipulate the magic of it, or I read it correctly, and I'm able to identify this magic on the statue, it opens a secret entrance that takes me directly to the end of the dungeon. Directly to the end, where the boss is hanging out. And I'm able to get to that boss, able to kill him, and get out. Nobody knows. Now there's consequence. Well, you can make consequence, right? How can you make consequence of that? Well, now that I've gotten through that whole dungeon, assuming nobody was able to detect me, how do all the other people in the dungeon respond? That's something that could come up later on in the game. That's something that 5, 6, 7 quests from now, I could run into some of those people that were in the dungeon somehow. I don't know how. Make it up. This is just a bad example. Somehow they're able to identify that I was the person that took out their leader. They appreciate me for it, and now they're willing to work with me and help me achieve some other goal later on. Now you have real feeling consequences. And again, this is a very shoddy, poor example of me sort of just verbal diarrhea explaining. But that is what will set apart Starfield as an RPG versus being a fantastic RPG for a lot of players, myself included. Other things too, coming from a D&D background, one of the things that I've always appreciated is that if you're playing a spellcaster, right, there's different types of spellcasters, and absolutely, they all get access to different spells, and they can all do different unique things. And because they can all, again, give a game that have done that, because I can't remember any, Divinity 2 touches on that. Not to that same extent. Baldur's Gate. When you play Baldur's Gate, and if you're strong in Arcana, you can notice things, versus if you're strong in Perception, you'll walk right past things. And again, it's not to that level of depth. I'm not saying that it's on par. But those types of, Larian type games consider all these different factors. And they try to work that in so that you as a character feel special, rewarded, and impacted because you made certain choices or because you've grown your character in a particular way. So if you look at, for example, Baldur's Gate, Starfield touches on it because it has the backgrounds, because it has backgrounds and traits. You kind of dip a toe into some of these areas. But with Baldur's Gate, we can't compare CRPG with action. Why not? But why? Why can't you? Because the thing is, if CRPG is accomplishing what is ideal for the RPG genre as a whole, or what, again, it's all subjective, but what I see as like, this is where I would want my RPG to go, absolutely, if I am playing, it could tie back kind of into more, you look at Oblivion, where Oblivion segmented, you are playing as a warrior, you could have your custom class, but you're playing, and that's the backgrounds, right? Starfield touches on the backgrounds. But now you could definitively take some of those elements, and you could say in Skyrim, when you're playing Skyrim and you're going through the Companion's quest line, right? If you're playing a battle mage, which absolutely could fit in the Companions, why are there not elements that incorporate, hey, you are playing a battle mage. Let's try to tailor some of the Companions questline or some of the things that your character can pick up on or notice or loot. Or the way that you could go about certain situations. Let's incorporate part of that into the game because you're playing a battle mage character. That's effectively what it is, but it's just taking it a step further. Now, because you've interacted with that unique battle mage aspect, now you're going to see how that plays out far down the line. And again, it ties back to what we talked about earlier, which was the change in world state. The world state of the game needs to be different to make it feel impactful, to make it feel like it mattered, to make it feel like it wasn't just this isolated instance in this pocket of a much bigger world. That the one single thing I did not just affect this tiny little corner. It's okay that those things exist. And maybe I'm asking for too much. I'm just speaking to my idealized version. Which I know. I understand is reaching, right? We have to be candid about that. We have to be honest and open about that. Like IRL, everyone can do everything if they try hard enough. Everyone can do everything. However, people have natural talents and natural inclinations, and that absolutely should be a factor. Yes, you can play, like orcs aren't typically good at magic. Yes, you can play a spellcasting orc, but there 100% should be, obstacles to overcome and some ways that might get affected. If I want to be a wizard look at Baldur's Gate, if I want to play as a wizard that's running around smacking people with a sword, I will never, ever, ever be able to do it as well as a fighter can. And I think that should be the case because it adds to a stronger identity per class. And now, while it seemingly is more restrictive, like on the surface it seems like you're being more restrictive, it actually makes it more expansive as far as the choices that you can make, because every single thing now feels a lot more unique from one another, and the game will be built with all of that in mind. Yes, this player is playing this way, this player is playing this way, this one's doing this way. There's some combinations thereof that can occur, and we're going to try to keep that in mind, but it's not built where, again, every single character can lockpick that door, just to go back to our metaphor example. Exactly, Jonas, with my axe held with my big Nord hands. It also makes the world feel more believable. It does. It does. It makes the world feel more immersive, which is a very important word. You can multi-class, but keep in mind then, that's, again, you can multi-class, But even still, when you do multi-class, you will never... Now, you're not as good of a wizard, and you're not as good of a swordsman. If you want to multi-class into fighter. And on top of that, there's certain prerequisites before you can do that. So, some people... I think Baldur's Gate makes it a little bit less restrictive, but... You know, you need to have certain skills. Like, for example, if you want to play a wizard that multi-classes into a fighter, you need to have your strength at like 14 or something. And that absolutely is a factor. That absolutely is a factor. Yeah, exactly, Jake. It's about the multiple ways that you can approach a situation that actually leads to multiple outcomes, right? It's not just about well, I can either here's an example. I was going to say you know, minor Starfield quest spoiler. In New Atlantis, there is a scientist who's researching some of the trees that are nearby. And there's something going on with the trees, and you have to get, at some point, you have to get data from a fellow scientist, and there's a couple ways you can do it. You can either do directly what he says, you can kill him, or you can pickpocket him and get the data, right? There's 3 ways, all of which give you the data. But none of, so now you've accomplished part 1. You've accomplished part 1, which is giving multiple, this is not the right hand gesture, which is multiple things that you can do. Thankfully, that was off camera. So you're approaching the multiple things you can do in order to achieve that goal. The problem is, now that we've gotten to this goal, it needs to funnel and then reverse funnel. It can't just funnel and then that's it. That's the end of it. You need to have this and that to make for what I believe is a genre-defining RPG, or what can be more genre-defining in the RPG space. Like how in Morrowind you were treated like the lever. Like how in Morrowind you were treated like the lever you were at, level you were at when you were going through the Mage's Guild. The level you were at when you were going through the Mage's Guild. Yeah, that's a part of it. You know, NPCs, like Bethesda touches on it because, you know, for example, and Todd Howard has called this example out explicitly, where they said, you know, you'll walk around and people really like that the guards kind of respond, hey, I know you're in the Dark Brotherhood, Hail Sithis, or like, hey, I'm part of the Thieves Guild, like, keep it up, or whatever. They don't tell you to keep it up, but the guards kind of acknowledge. In Starfield, this happens if you clear out a couple bases. One of the guards might randomly, one of the random things that can happen is a guard will say, hey, you've been taking out some of those outposts, here's some credits, thanks, you're doing some good work. So they do respond to it, but I don't think that's enough. It needs to be more impactful. Again, that's just sort of there's a difference between acknowledgement and actual change, and it needs to be actual change, not just acknowledgement. Hey, you did something. The next step would be actual change. Yeah, the entirety of the game is built to be experienced with a single playthrough, and I think that actually works against the game. I took Ronin background. Do you know how many times it was mentioned? 2. See, that's an issue. Like, that is an issue. That's genuinely 280 hours and mentioned 2. That is genuinely an issue. And I know that some come up more than others. For example, I've had United Colonies Native, and that's come up quite a bit, which is part of the reason why I picked it. I thought it would be a little bit more relevant and more frequently come up. But why is the Ronin background not being applied to more than just dialogue? Why is it not being played situationally? And this you can branch off this whole conversation to why I think the Elder Scrolls system, Oblivion system, where they had strength, dexterity, charisma, or strength, athletics, wisdom, intelligence, luck, where they had all of those individual skills. They weren't really skills. What are they technically called? Whatever, you know what I'm saying. So when Oblivion utilized all those, I think that's actually a strength versus just here's all your skills. Thank you, attributes, yes. Having attributes is a much stronger system because when you put attributes, now with, this is a whole other kind of side of the discussion too, to define a good RPG, to me, again, personal to me, it's opinion. When you have attributes, one of the big problems I also have with Starfield, again, comes with the lack of diversity, because every character can do everything because you don't have attributes. Is that the end-all be-all reason? No. I'm well aware of that fact. Does it contribute? 100%. Why? Because when you play the way that Bethesda games are currently laid out, where every character can do everything, that's when you start to see a lot of, hey, your melee weapons do plus 20% more damage. That's when you see a lot of, hey, you can do 20% damage with rifle-type weapons. Those are not exciting things to get as a player. That does not change a single part of the game. A single part of the game on where that just keeps pace with the difficulty that enemies get as you level up. That's all it does, to help you still maintain some semblance of control. Assassin, thank you so much for being here. Don't worry, I noticed that you were here and Red was not. I noticed. Enjoy your dinner. So that's where you see a lot of it, versus if you put points into strength as a broad attribute is what influences your damage output with melee weapons. So there is no need now to have those perks. Yeah, they could still be in there somewhere, but lump them in with some other things. You can now do a swinging attack that has a chance to disarm enemies, and you also do an additional 5% damage. Cool, just tack that on there. But don't make it where I need to buy 5 skills within a skill tree just to feel like my character. That's not good. Those aren't exciting perks to take. It's a combat skill, but I see skills changing the outcome of many quests that I did. It's a combat skill, but I see skills changing the outcome of many quests that I did. I guess you mean probably things under the social tree? For example, the manipulation. All trees. All trees impacted the outcome. I'm gonna need an example. You're gonna need to share an example of that, because I can't say I felt the same. Changing the outcome of the quest. Maybe how you approach it. I haven't seen the outcome changing because I have certain skills. And whether you can pick up the body. And melee sucks and I felt it. I don't even blame them. It took hard being a dumb guy that uses swords and nobody cares. Fair enough. And whether you can pick up the body of the dwarf you just killed and leave the body somewhere else. You could do that in Oblivion games, though, or in Bethesda games. You could drag the bodies around. I currently have a list of 5 future playthrough ideas. Not doing everything with one character hugely improves RPG elements in the game. For me, anyways. Oh, last comment. Yeah, oh, gotcha. Yeah, your strength attribute affects whether you can pick up the door. Yeah. It does improve the RPG elements. It does. But I think that a stronger RPG would come if the game was built from the ground up with that in mind. Versus, hey, well, in this playthrough, I made the decision to only do such and such quest lines. Which is how I play anyway. That's how I normally play these games. But I'm making the decision. So that, you know, that's just me getting to experience new content with a kind of a new perspective, a new outlook, a new roleplay as my character. I wouldn't say that's necessarily improving the RPG. That's improving the RPG experience for you. I don't know if that's improving the RPG elements of the game, if that makes any sense. Like, there's a difference between improving for, you know, your perception of it versus what's actually there. Isn't the idea behind them implementing traits? It is. But I don't think they've gone far enough. Yes, thank you, Reaper. Player created limitations versus the game actually having systems to support that playstyle. Exactly. You voiced exactly what I was trying to say. When the game is built, again, it all comes down to Bethesda games are built in that way so that you can do everything, and I think that actually ends up being a lot more limiting. Even though it sounds like more freedom on paper, it's the same with when Bethesda, kind of allegorically, you can look at when Bethesda's saying, well, you have the freedom to explore all these worlds, there's 1,000 worlds to go off and explore, and you could land anywhere and do all this stuff. And like on the surface, that sounds great and incredible and amazing, and I'm gonna be this space explorer that goes around and finds and does all this stuff, and I'm gonna land on all these planets, and there's gonna be, and then you do it and you go, wait, why am I doing this? Like, it's fun for a bit, and every once in a while, even in my playthrough, I still stop and I still do it. Let's go land on this planet just to take a break, see what's there. Maybe I'll get something interesting. But for the most part, I don't. So that on paper sounds really interesting. Similarly, being able to do every single thing that you want and truly play as the character you want to sounds great on paper until you realize that it actually limits what the game is able to do because they design it in such a way. You know, they don't support exactly what Reaper said. They do not support any particular playstyle. For example, if you have a research skill, the NPC doesn't treat you like someone that doesn't know what they're talking about. Some even say they are sorry for assuming your knowledge. I like this flavor. Hey, welcome. Thanks for subscribing, Reaper. I didn't know that you weren't subscribed. Well, welcome. We don't do this often, but I think I'm going to start doing kind of monthly hangouts. I have on my wall over there, I actually have a whole calendar where I was drafting out just general content plans. And I did want to touch on kind of the state of the channel and stuff. Yeah, I'm looking at my ideas, but I did want to do like a once a month kind of address like this. Since I don't necessarily want to do, you know, like weekly gameplay live streams or something like that. It comes up on dialogue, but the outcome was always the same at the end of the quest is what DamarcoDude is getting at. Yeah, that's kind of, you know, again, to use the funnel, right? You have the funnel, it goes like this. Things can, I don't know if I'm on screen. Yeah, so you have the funnel, and you can approach the funnel from any way that you want. But once you get through the funnel, it's this. Right? We need it to go like this. You get through the funnel, and then it goes like this. So it needs to. This might have been a better way to I don't know why I didn't think of this before. Versus this, right? I don't know. Now I'm just doing. So anyway, yeah, good, Danilo. That being said, at the end of the day, any conversation on this matter, I wanted to highlight some of this stuff. Obviously, a lot of this is hey Ace, how's it going? Obviously, I don't see this as a problem at all, and it's not a skill tree fault. Well, let me ask you, Danilo, would it be more interesting to get a skill tree that says, hey, you get plus 20% damage, or you can do this actual brand new ability? Like, again, what I said before. Like, instead of, hey, you do 10% more damage, level it up again and you'll get 20% damage, spend that skill point, level it up a third time, you'll get 30% damage. Like, is that exciting? No. I would say no, not at all. Compared to, you unlock this new ability. You get a whirlwind attack that will attack every enemy around you. You could do that in an RPG. You get, your sword swings have a chance to disarm enemies in front of you. You get a new style of power attack that will, potentially leave, or will potentially down an enemy temporarily. So they fall over and they have to crawl for a little bit before they recover and get up. right? That could be, those could replace plus 20% damage, and they actually have an impact on how. And if you wanted to take that step further, right? Now you take it a step further, build it down, break it down into, see how I'm getting into this? Break it down into, if you are wielding a sword in one hand and nothing in the other hand, you get different style. You get different style of attacks. You unlock a piercing strike that can cause enemies to bleed. Yeah, effectively, that's kind of the same thing, right? As just, why don't I just get an extra 10% damage if they're just going to do bleed over time damage? But I feel like I'm getting a bit more rewarded for diving into this specific playstyle, right? As if you're wielding a rapier, you do new attacks that can, I don't know, temporarily stun, and it's kind of the same thing, right? I don't have all the examples in the world. But in Starfield, you can disarm with your skill too. Melee can disarm, stun, etc. You can do that. But then you also, like, what I'm saying is, these might not be, what I'm getting at is these. Oh, Jake, take care, thank you, enjoy your real life responsibilities, it was a pleasure to hang out with you. I guess that might not exactly be the best example, right? Because some of those things you can do in Starfield, but instead of having plus 10% damage, maybe it's not stunning, right? Maybe it is, weapon attacks. If you kill an enemy, and Starfield kind of does, I know Starfield kind of does this too, but a bit more abstractly. But if you kill an enemy while using a blunt weapon, there's a % chance that it will cause a nearby enemy to flee from combat, right? Instead of, at some point in time, because any of these games are always built around combat, you are going to be forced to take that perk that does 10% damage. And as a player, I do not necessarily feel like I'm getting anything exciting or worthwhile by taking that perk. The only thing I feel like is I'm losing out on getting something more interesting. But not only that, if Bethesda wanted to have X amount, like we need, Bethesda says we're going to make 20 different skills. And like the whole game has 20 skills, right? And the first 6 is going to be, this one gives 10% damage for melee, this one gives 10% damage for range, this one gives 10% damage with this particular type of melee weapon, this one gives 10% damage with this particular type of range weapons. It's a tier 1 perk. They need to be basic. They can be basic. They can still be basic, right? Again, I do not have all of the answers as to what they should or could be, but as creative, that's what the developer's job would be, is to figure that out. How can they make it feel more interesting? If you're playing a spellcaster, you unlock the ability to cast specific types of spells. Yeah, Reaper, you understand what I'm saying, right? Plus 10 damage are just stand-in for a lack of attributes. If perks are to be in the game, then they need to actually change how your character plays. Perks should not be attributes, and attributes should not be perks. And then again, all of them shouldn't necessarily, I guess, revolve around like special abilities that your weapons do. Of course, those need to exist, but I would, I guess, look to what might be a good example. Some of the legendary attributes that you can find in Starfield, right? Take some of those, make them perks. Some of those could easily be perks, instead of being attached to this random weapon that you find, or this random piece of armor that you find. There are definitively ways that you can that you can get creative with it. Is all I'm saying. And you can have the best of both worlds, Danilo. You can have it where you still get perks, you know, disarm, stun, etc. Those, of course, will still be there. I think those are kind of the simplest examples. But then if you add in attributes, you don't need to spend your time investing in those percent damage perks. And we can agree to disagree. Like, that's not a big deal. But because obviously not everyone's going to agree on everything. Ace Herb, hello. Did I enjoy Starfield's story? I enjoy Starfield's questing. Oh, I did not mean to pin that. I enjoy Starfield's story and writing more than a lot of past Bethesda games. I think generally speaking, their writing has improved significantly. And I'm excited to see that kind of area grow. I just think in Starfield's specific case, it's a bit of a shame that it kind of got muddied by all the other elements that people don't like about it. So if it was more focused on that part of it, and less on, you know, for example, we need to have space flight, and we need to have 1,000 planets, and we need to have the scanning, and we need to have the outpost system, then I think it maybe would have appealed to more people. Right now, it's attracting so many different audiences, and I think nobody's really finding anything that they latch onto that they definitively love about it. That's my take on Starfield, even though I enjoy the game. I think Starfield is a solid 7 out of 10. That would be my review score for Starfield. Would be a 7 out of 10. With 5 being an average game, 6 being slightly above average. I will talk about melee because that's all I did. If you pick up only the damage, you can't progress. Take melee related perks. If you pick up only the damage, you can't progress. Take melee related perks. Taking melee related perks make you better at what you do. Well, no, that makes sense. But I don't think you should have to take the damage related perks at all. It should just be tied to an attribute. That's what it keeps coming back to. Is you shouldn't have to. You should just be able to take the melee related perks. Like damage addition should not be. Damage addition should not be a perk. It should just be part of what you get. Ningo? Is this Ningo? Is that what they named it? Is that what you guys are talking about? Bingo. Gotcha. Let's hope it does despite Wilshen moving studio. Yeah, so Pete, Wilshen leaving. I know someone asked about Wilshen leaving and my thoughts on that. And I think this will kind of be our last topic. But Wilshen leaving, I think, is kind of a big hit for the company. So I don't know. They're playing as Khajiit. I wouldn't. If you named your Khajiit Ningo, I'd understand. When they have attributes, Starfield does not have it, so they need 1 damage skill. I'm not sure I follow what you're saying. Not sure I understand what you're saying. But at the end of the day, if I invest +2 into my dexterity, then by investing +2, that should give me more damage to dexterity-based weapons. In this case, let's just say, or let's just use strength, right? If I invest 10 points into my strength, investing 10 points into my strength should make my damage with melee weapons go up by X amount. Nowhere in perks should be more exciting. Perks should feel rewarding. Perks should be cool to pick up. Perks should impact how I play the game on a bit more of a deeper level. Oh, yeah, no, okay. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, alright. You're talking past each other. Yeah. Jonas, you're right. No, that's so all of this boils down to what I would want to see in the Elder Scrolls 6, though, doesn't it? Right? So, anyway. Yeah, so Will Shen leaving Bethesda. Will Shen leaving Bethesda, I think, is a big blow. I have a couple theories. I talked about this with Jonas, you actually briefly, but I have a couple of theories. Some more concerning than others. Right. The first and foremost is that he just wanted to leave. He worked on plenty of Bethesda games. He worked across Skyrim, its DLC. He worked on Fallout 4, its DLC. He worked on Starfield in a bit of a more of a lead role. And so he got his creative fulfillment from Bethesda, and as a result is moving on. And that's perfectly fine, because you need to make sure, as a creative, you need to make sure that you're constantly putting yourself in a stimulating environment that feels rewarding to do. Then conversely, the more worrying side of it is, of course, involving the growth of Bethesda as a whole. We kind of touched on it earlier, the change in direction where Bethesda is trying to be 5 different games in one, and maybe that's just a less clear vision, right? Because you see Will Shen going to a studio like Wyrdsong, which has 40 developers. They need to be more focused in their vision. It's just by the sheer size, they have to be more focused on that vision. And you think about, well, maybe that's just more appealing, because I don't have to worry about, well, let's have the settlement system and all that other stuff. So that is a concern. And then on top of that, you lose some of the cohesion, right? So Bethesda, when you look at Oblivion, around 100 developers worked on that game, versus Starfield, which I believe Bethesda Game Studios specifically is upwards of 450 developers that worked on Starfield. And so just that level of communication that you get from having a unified vision between all your team members, where you're all in agreement and all excited and feeding off that energy of one another, if that got lost in Bethesda. And as a result, they are still small. They're still small comparatively, but as far as kind of what I think a lot of Bethesda developers were used to, going from 100 to 400 is it's a huge change. And we actually saw it with, for example, CD Projekt Red, right? CD Projekt Red just recently announced that they were shrinking their studio size because they wanted to have a more clear vision with the project that they're working on. It was very, and you know, layoffs suck no matter which way that you turn it. It's absolutely terrible for those developers, and we all want the best for them, and there's a lot of talented people, but they did that so they could really hone in and narrow and focus on their vision. And Bethesda's getting bigger and bigger, but now you're not just talking about Bethesda. You also have to keep in mind all of the other support studios that are going to be coming from Microsoft, that are going to kind of be dipping a toe, further kind of spreading out that close, tight-knit feel that you have. If Microsoft decides, hey, we're going to bring in some third-party partners to work with you to help this, now you have third-party people coming in, working on these games. And so just the overall vibe, the feeling at Bethesda, definitely in some capacity must have shifted, and I worry that that's part of it. So you have a lot of the, as Jonas, I think you phrased it, a lot of the old guard leaving Bethesda. Is that going to lead to an identity shift within the studio? I would say it already sort of has. I would say that we're already kind of seeing that more and more, but not fully, right? I think there's still enough of Bethesda trying to retain that old identity, largely, I feel, because of Todd Howard. Todd Howard is the one saying, we want to be able to pick up every pencil. We want to work in the creation engine, even though people keep yelling at us. Mind you, a lot of people don't know what they're talking about, but keep yelling at us to change engines. We want to make sure that we have all these different systems in the game the way that we do, because that's what brings the life of a Bethesda game to it. And if Todd Howard ever were to leave, I think that will sort of be the breaking point. I really do. Unless somebody who shares Todd Howard's vision and shares Todd Howard's ideals almost one-to-one takes his spot. And even then, I don't know if they'll command the authority that Todd Howard has, because of course Todd Howard, I think to this day even, is still one of the only video game developers in the Hall of Fame, which he won that award somewhat recently, I think 2 years ago. So it is interesting to see how things will continue to shift and move with Bethesda. I think for now, especially with the Elder Scrolls 6, especially with the Elder Scrolls 6, that game is largely, its identity is being fueled by Todd. And so if there were any concerns about kind of the feeling of where Bethesda games are going and what they're going to be like, it's because it will still be retained with the Elder Scrolls 6. Beyond that, harder to say with Fallout 5 and so on. Todd and Emil. Yeah, Todd and Emil kind of go hand in hand, but Emil from a different side, right? Emil's coming from a different side of it. Because obviously he's more on the narrative part, less of the overall game design and the producer role that Todd Howard is now in. So it is a shame, genuinely at one point I believe that Will Shen would kind of fill in some of that Todd Howard role. I really did. And now that he's left, but it's also very inspiring because it was unfortunate to see, for example, what happened to Immortals of Aveum, or Avum. Immortals of Aveum did not sell well, and that was their first studio coming from ex-BioWare developers, among many others, but ex-BioWare developers at the lead, and that game came out, didn't sell so well, and they actually had to lay off some staff. And that was an example of a game I was really excited for. I was part of the problem because I didn't buy it. I didn't play it yet. I think it also released at a really bad time, but that's besides the point. So that was one of those instances where these indie developers or these industry veterans, even though they're industry veterans and they have the name and they have the legacy and they have their titles that they worked on, that they worked on, come to the table to make those experiences, it still falls short in some ways. And so I do hope that's not going to be the case with something like Wyrdsong. I think Wyrdsong has an advantage because with Immortals of Aveum, you were competing in the FPS genre, which of course people already have their Call of Duties and Battlefields and Doom and Quake and all that other stuff, although Quake probably not the best example, versus RPGs. And I generally feel that RPG players are more willing to branch out and try new things. That's why we saw success with titles like Kingdom Come Deliverance, or titles like, for example, not the Outer Worlds. There was another indie RPG that I just had on the top of my head. But there's I think that generally speaking, or Disco Elysium was another one, isometric RPG title, and that was able to capture a lot of players because I feel as though just we're willing to kind of explore a little bit more. So I'm less worried about Wyrdsong, but it's inspiring because you can't have another Bethesda. You can't, as much as people love Bethesda and as much as people love Obsidian, you can't get another one of that without new studios coming into the picture and taking a stab at making some of their ideas of what these experiences could and should be. So I'm very much looking forward to Will Shen being on board with that project, and seeing how they kind of blend some of the Bethesda identity with some of the things we've been talking about today, with a lot of the things that Jeff Gardner stated is some of what we touched on. For example, the world having distinctly different states based on what you do in the game. And that type of stuff I'm really looking forward to. Maybe Bethesda needs an outsider perspective. Yes, but also if you're talking about sheer growth, you also have to keep in mind, simply too many cooks, as simple as it might be. I always do look forward to new people coming in, but you do have to keep in mind, right? People love Oblivion. People love Skyrim. They love what those games did. Naturally, we don't want to just see the way I look at it is Skyrim was a great game. Oblivion was also a great game, but Skyrim improved on a lot of it. Did it regress in some ways? Sure, there's arguments to be made, but ultimately it retained the identity that I love about Elder Scrolls games and brought it into the modern age with a newer, updated engine, and definitively, in my opinion, although I still think Oblivion is the superior title, I think Skyrim really improved on a lot. So with something like Elder Scrolls 6, you have to ensure that an outside perspective is great to have, but when it comes in, it doesn't disrupt too much of what people love about those past experiences. That someone doesn't come in and say, this is my idea of what Elder Scrolls should be. And it's so far misaligned with what the majority of your fan base actually likes that it shifts. Now, nobody joining the studio, unless they're jumping right into like a creative director position, is going to have that level of influence. And even then, I think you're kind of get overshadowed by someone like Todd Howard, which is again why I think as long as he's there, Bethesda is for most people going to be on the right track. But yeah, you just gotta be careful. If you know, too many outside perspectives can change the identity, and you start to get something different, which I'm not gonna say is good, I'm not gonna say is bad. I think it's just different, which is how I try to approach a lot of things. As someone who believes in the good of a competitive market, I think BGS veterans going to something wicked is promising and exciting for the genre and overall market. It just may be trouble for BGS if they can't adjust. Yeah, if they can't adjust, I'm assuming by adjust you mean sort of from a game design perspective, and if they can't adjust from a game design perspective, yeah, they're in trouble. But of course, the thing is, like Fallout 76 and how that found an audience, something like Bethesda going into this modern age of Bethesda, if you want to call it that, they will find talent that wants to do those types of things, right? So Bethesda will adapt to kind of go in the new direction, even if I don't like it, or Jonas, you don't like it. There's going to be an audience for it, same way Fallout 76 found an audience. And then out of that comes something like Something Wicked, that crafts what players are hoping for, albeit on an indie scale. So it would take some time. You know, you can't expect Something Wicked Games to come out with their first debut title and it feels like this is the Oblivion in 2023 that I've wanted forever, because that's just not going to be the case. Yeah, who will they be now? We have to see. So anyway, I think overall this was fantastic discussion. It was a lot of fun to kind of get many of these points out there that I've been feeling for quite some time, and that I've just wanted to talk about. We kind of talked, why Starfield is both good and bad, and kind of a more respectable way. We touched on Something Wicked Games and kind of how that studio is adjusting, defining a RPG. Danilo, you don't need to apologize. You helped. Listen, it helps to challenge perspectives, and I think that's very healthy. Because if I was sitting in a chat and talking to a chat that just agreed with everything that I agreed with and just said yes to everything I say, then that's not constructive for anybody. Old Bethesda is not there anymore. They're at the Wayward Realms talking about Arena and Daggerfall devs. Old Bethesda is not there anymore. Most of Old Bethesda is not there. Again, as long as Todd Howard sort of stays there to really define the direction of these games, I think it's good hands. It's when he leaves that I think things will really start to slip away. If he doesn't get replaced by someone who shares exactly his visions, or more or less his visions, right? Once they shift away from that, that's when Bethesda, I think, will truly be different. Like, I'm hopeful. I'm very optimistic for the Elder Scrolls 6. I'm very optimistic for that game. Incredibly so. Do I think it's going to be the perfect game? Do I think it's going to be my favorite Elder Scrolls game? No. Do I want it to be? Yeah, absolutely. Do I want to love it more than Skyrim? 1000%. I would love that. That'd be great. But Todd Howard, I think, is the one holding that ship together. And ideally, by the time he's ready to leave, he will have had a team in place that has learned from him, grown from him, and agrees in that vision and the direction that he kind of wants to go in for the most part. And if it gets replaced by, like, for example, let's just say hypothetically, I don't know, Phil Spencer was put in charge of Bethesda, like tomorrow it's Phil Spencer in charge. Or let's just say it was, I don't know, Marty Stratton, for example. It's not the same. It's not the same. Wayward Realms, I want to see more of what they're working on too. Wayward Realms, I haven't been keeping up with anything they've been doing, if they've said anything. Me too, Danilo. Especially because it's in a... Again, I think that Elder Scrolls has its identity. I think that they did good with Starfield, and I'm just hoping that the direction Elder Scrolls 6 takes is one that follows in line with Elder Scrolls' identity, at least the precedent that's been set, which to me is, I like the smaller maps. I do. Smaller maps. You don't need this gigantic procedurally generated world. All of the dungeons are handcrafted. There's a lot of mini stories taking place within each of these dungeons, which again, you kind of get in Starfield, right? You go to the cities and you see like all the different random quests and people you could talk to and things you could pick up. In Starfield, when you go to New Atlantis, it's overwhelming in that regard. And if you take all of those, and you put them the way that Skyrim did, where in Skyrim you go into a dungeon and you go to loot this chest that's there and you fall through a trap door and now you're stuck in a cage and a necromancer is going to perform I always bring up that example because I love that. Like, that was a special moment. Or even when you find, for example, just, you know, it's happened in Oblivion too, but you find the people outside the dungeon. They say, hey, there's treasure inside and you can help me go get it. There's that one quest line with the what is it? It's the wizard and the knight, I believe, and they're standing outside the dungeon, and then you approach them and they're like, hey, you want to go with us? And then it turns out that the one lady, I think it was the fighter, she betrays everybody to go get the treasure for, like, that's its own little self-contained story, and those characters have entire backstories and entire history together, and the dungeons tell stories in and of themselves, and more of that. That's what I need to see in Skyrim, and what I hope to see in in Elder Scrolls 6, because Skyrim did it. I want to see them do it even further with the Elder Scrolls 6. And that doesn't mean every cave needs to have this dramatic, awesome backstory. Sometimes the cave can just be a cave. That's totally fine. But those need to exist. The majority of them, I need to see that. And again, that more personal feeling landscape. I want to become intimately familiar with the landscape the way I was in Skyrim. At a certain point in Skyrim, I felt like I was at home. I knew exactly the roads. I knew where they went. I knew which side trails and where those went to. And I really familiarized myself. Hey, Ty, how's it going? Welcome. Thanks for stopping by. So those to me are some of the identity of Bethesda, of Elder Scrolls games. And that's the tone, as you said. Anyway, so we're gonna wrap it up there. Thank you guys for joining and hanging out. Again, I think I want to try to do these like at least once a month. And right now I was thinking, for example, like the first Thursday of every month, just kind of do a hangout and chat about stuff, and maybe in the future, for future ones, I kind of get your perspective and your ideas of what you want to talk about. This stream was not labeled well at all. Of course, it was just entirely a Bethesda discussion. As you can tell, Bethesda is... I find it very difficult to not talk about Bethesda, just because they're my favorite games. They're some of my favorite games. So even though I keep telling myself, let's branch out, let's talk about all these different games, let's be more of a variety, do more variety stuff, I end up getting swept back in. So yeah, the stream definitely could have been labeled better. But anyway, thank you guys for joining me here. I appreciate all of you hanging out. It's been a lot of fun. How do you know that Todd isn't holding Bethesda back creatively? Todd is the one who pushed for procedural generation in Starfield. Todd... One day I return. I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to keep this brief. I'm going to keep this one brief, Ty, because you just joined, and I want to at least get one of your questions in. How do we know, Todd? I don't think that the procedural generation is something that necessarily held Bethesda back. I think that level of procedural generation that we saw in Starfield was actually something that, I'm not going to say was innovative by any stretch, but I think that it was again, you did miss this part of the conversation. Reaper brings up a great point. Elder Scrolls used for Daggerfall, so that's already something that they did, and they referenced Daggerfall when they were talking about making Starfield. However, what's the best way to say this? With Starfield, having that sense of scope and scale, no, I don't want to land on every planet. And as a result, what I find with Starfield is that having that scale immensely is part of Starfield's inherent identity. And we talked a lot about identity in the beginning of this stream. And how it, having those 1,000 planets works for Starfield, but it might not work for an Elder Scrolls or might not work for a Fallout. And we talked a bit about how I firmly believe that Fallout needs to be made for Fallout fans, Elder Scrolls needs to be made for Elder Scrolls fans, and Starfield for Starfield fans. And that's how the game should be developed going forward, the mindset that I would want to see going forward, versus every game that Bethesda makes saying, well, we need to make all this for Bethesda fans. Like, they should be, treated as individual entities for individual audiences, even though there's overlap, right? And they'll all have the Bethesda DNA, but they feel distinctly unique. And I think part of that procedural generation, as you said, Ty, is part of Starfield's identity, and it's not necessarily a bad thing in Starfield's case. I'm not saying it's the best thing. It's not the content I like about the game. It's even it's a complaint I have about the game, because quite frankly, it's just boring, and I think going to most of those planets is a bit of a waste of time. However, I at the same token, I will say I do appreciate that I have the option versus a Mass Effect where you're told this is the planet you can land on, and this is exactly where you can land on, and this is exactly what you can do there. I do appreciate the fact that the option exists. Sky Oblivion looking great. I do appreciate that the option exists in Starfield, that I can do that stuff, right? To just know that it's a possibility in and of itself is kind of a cool thing. So I think he's pushing it forward, even if he's a bit overambitious. I would actually say the problem is overambition. Nope. A good subscriber is never late or never on time. He arrives precisely when he means to, or she. So anyway, we're going to end it with that one. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate it. This was, again, a lot of fun. I'll try to, like I said, the first Thursday of every month is when I'm thinking about doing kind of this monthly conversation. And it will not always just be all about Bethesda. And I'll try to kind of more clearly define what I want these to be. If I just want it to be kind of like a channel address or what have you. Or just an extended conversation. I don't know the exact formula yet. That'll evolve and grow over time, like Bethesda games do. So anyway, thank you all. And as I stall for time and try to find, there we go, my other screen. Remember to leave a like on the stream to help it get. Yes, thank you. Remember to. Anyway, go play. Did you say go play Redfall and tell us if it's good? You could check out my review on Redfall, and just watch the review. There's a lot of effort that went into that one. It's pretty good. It's one of the ones I'm most proud of, actually. So enjoy that if you haven't seen it already. Anyway, all right. Good night, everybody.